Coming up in today's podcast.
But when you think about it, it's horrifying to think that some guy in Australia has been given the power to override and interfere in personal property affairs of thousands of persons all over the world. I mean, what right why should the minister of the Lord in the recovery be even included in a family trust deed? It makes no sense. He's kind of weaseled his way into almost every single facet of Brethren life. In the Preston Down Trust deed, which is like a template for all the UK hall trusts, there are 20 references to the minister of the Lord in the recovery. 20. The trust deeds give him so much power. If you look at it, if you study it closely, which I've done, he can basically do whatever he pleases with the assets.
Yeah.
Same with family trust deeds. You urgently need to look at your own deeds and see what the wording is in them.
What a way to have control, though, right? Like this, everything that you've pointed out here shows how this is how they gain control of keeping people in and using this fear. I mean, this isn't the first time that I've heard of this. This comes up in many people who want to leave, like whole families that want to leave, and they get caught in a lot of things like this. So this is really great that you're laying this out in black and white for everybody to see exactly what you've been through trying to come to some sort of resolution.
Welcome to the Get a Life podcast. Explore survivor stories. Uncover the hidden truths. Join our X-Call conversations. You matter, and so does your story.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Get a Life podcast. We have another jam-packed podcast today. Once again, exposing the hypocrisy and lies of the exclusive brethren, now known as the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. Today on our panel, we have Richard Marsh and our special guest that is no stranger to this channel, Steve Simmons from Auckland, New Zealand. Welcome, guys. Steve is going to walk us through some updates and shocking behavior once again from the leaders of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. I think today's podcast is so important in revealing the blatant difference of what goes on behind their doors versus what is shown to the public. Since our last podcast, I have had so many insiders reach out regarding the One School Global teacher Tim that spoke up and confirmed for us what so many teachers have spoken up about. I had one conversation with an insider that was extremely upset at the hypocrisy and arrogance of the PBCC school leaders governing their restriction and how it's becoming so hardcore and strict that the life has been extremely sucked out of their schools more than ever. I also want to thank all the insiders for making this podcast channel a topic of your Sunday breaks and how it's becoming a household name in there. I had a conversation with another insider and they told me it's not even being hidden conversations anymore. And this is what we wanted. Talk about what's happening. I don't care if you're disagreeing with us. Just get conversations flowing because it is starting to crack open conversations that families have been needing to have. And now many families are realizing they all are not happy in there. That's the first step. Some are getting questions answered they've been wanting answered for years. So please continue sending us your input and we will continue putting out the content you are looking for. Steve, we appreciate you coming back on. I am going to hand it over to you and let's get started on this. What news do you have since you last did your podcast?
Hey, Cheryl, and hello, Richard, and everyone. Yeah, it's a year. It's pretty much exactly a year since I did the last podcast. First one was mainly about a fraudulent scheme, which I believe it was fraudulent anyway, run by Unispace back in 2014 and through to 2018 or thereabouts, when it was owned by the Hales clan and a few other persons in the inner circle, using the Brethren schools as a vehicle for laundering millions of dollars, which was given as charitable donations, and then finding its way into the pockets of a small number of persons with the right connections.
Did anyone ever challenge or take issues with anything in those podcasts?
No, No, nobody. Isn't that interesting? I specifically said in that podcast that I'd withdraw and apologise if I said anything or implied anything that wasn't factually correct. And nobody's ever raised a single thing with me, which is interesting. They know it's true, and in any case, there's plenty of witnesses and documents to back it up. So, and then the second,
they're a highly litigious bunch that have had no hesitation in the past of taking people to court over the most ridiculous things, and the fact that they've neither even, contacted you or contacted us. I mean, the only explanation is that everything must be true, because if there was anything that they could take issue with, their lawyers would have been beating on our door within 24 hours.
Yeah.
So that speaks for itself.
And the second one was more about my personal story and how I'd ended up being cast out and cut off from all my family and friends. But so I thought I'd give a bit of an update as to the present situation, and especially in the light of the current attempt to window dress their image at the present time. So I gather a letter went out to all members worldwide a week or two ago regarding the church's refreshed public engagement activity, and in view of balancing the false and derogatory stories published by detractors. Okay, maybe the stories are a bit derogatory, but they're not false.
Yeah, we'll just read this out. So it's got the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church in the upper right-hand corner, and it's dated 14/02/2025. And it says, "Dear brethren, we would like to update the brethren regarding the church's refreshed public engagement activity. As you know, we're sometimes the subject of misinformation in the media and on social media. To make sure fair and accurate information is available to the public, we have updated and launched a new look website and social media sites. They contain more information about what our community does and how we contribute to society through our charity, RRT, and our schooling system. And we have engaged professional contractors to manage and run these sites on our behalf. Please take a look at it at www.plymouthbrethrenchristianchurch.org. This is a decision we have taken to support every member of our community and to balance the false and derogatory stories published by detractors. The content on these pages will be from RRT and One School Global, as well as unique content we're creating about our way of life. An example of this, we have launched a recent series of short videos where we can share what it's like to live next door to us or work with us in our businesses. The new website, together with the social media channels, will provide the truth about our church, contribution, values, and way of life, and will help counter the misinformation that appears. If you have any questions regarding this update, you can email helpdesk@pbccservices.com. Kind regards, Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. Who goes to their neighbors and creates YouTube videos saying what nice people they are? Like, come on. Like, PBCC people, that is the most ridiculous thing. Everybody is laughing at you out here. It is hilarious. You don't go to your neighbors and ask them to do a video to say that you're kind people. You just are kind people. And because you're kind people, that is the representation you get.
Yeah.
Notice that the letter's not signed. Nobody will take any responsibility for it. Anyway, so apparently they've refreshed their website and engaged professional contractors to manage and run the websites on their behalf. So, okay, well, I don't know, maybe if professional contractors tell lies, maybe that's okay. That lets the brethren off the hook. I don't know. But to me, like the very concept of a church engaging a public relations firm to clean up their public image, it's about as wrong as it's possible to get. I mean, where's the scriptural basis for that? Did Jesus kowtow to the scribes and Pharisees? He called them offspring of vipers and hypocrites and whited sepulchres and all sorts of other derogatory names. They were derogatory, but they weren't false, were they? Jesus, he told them the hard truths which they didn't like. So, maybe if there was PR firms back in the
Bible
courts, I don't know
times.
what you call them, maybe the Pharisees would have engaged PR firm to clean up their public image after how the Lord spoke to them. They'd been their names had been besmirched a bit by the Lord, and this is
The astonishing thing is that the brethren claim that one of the two reasons they exist is for the testimony, which is, in other words, for their public witness. And they're literally saying in this letter that they have handed over the testimony to a commercial PR contractor, so that company then is the testimony, and they're washing their hands of the testimony.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's half of their job contracted out to a PR company. I mean, they'll probably contract out the Lord's Supper next. I mean, I'm sure there's someone who'll take that on for a fee.
Did the apostles in the Acts, did they modify their gospel message to make it more palatable to the general public? I mean, come on, guys. What on earth has happened to your moral compass? This is just ridiculous. Christians should never have to use a public relations firm. They should show the world what they are by their selflessness and love and humility and generosity. You're like Christ. That's what the name means. When you're a Christian, you're like Christ. You can expect to be hated by some people. You'll infuriate them, but others will be drawn to you. Well, so preach the gospel. Let the moral attributes of Christ shine out from what you are deep inside. Just suffer for the truth. Suffer gladly. The apostles in the Acts, they rejoiced that they were counted worthy to suffer for the name. So if you're true and honest, and if you do what you say you'll do, if you're marked by integrity and so on, you'll suffer, but you'll get a reward. And that's all the PR you ever need. If you ask me, engaging a PR firm is just further proof that the PBCC's become a cult, if any was still needed. It's the sort of thing the Scientologists would do.
Yeah.
The Peebs insist they're not a cult, but here's a list of typical characteristics of a cult.
The characteristics of a cult are: the group displays an excessive, zealous, and unquestioning commitment to its leader, and whether he is alive or dead, regards his belief system, ideology, and practices as the truth as law. Questioning, doubt, and dissent are discouraged or even punished. The leader dictates, sometimes in great detail, how members should think, act, and feel. Example, members must get permission to date, change jobs, or marry, or leaders prescribe what to wear, where to live, whether to have children, how to discipline children, and so forth. The group is elitist, complaining a special exalted status for itself, its leader or leaders, and its members. Example, the leader is considered the Messiah, a special being. The group has a polarized us versus them mentality, often resulting in conflict with the wider society. The leader is not accountable to any authorities. The group teaches or implies that its supposedly exalted ends justify whatever means it deems necessary. This may result in members participating in behaviors or activities they would have considered reprehensible or unethical before joining the group. Example, lying to family or friends, or collecting money for bogus charities. The leadership induces feelings of shame and or guilt in order to influence and control members. Often this is done through peer pressure and subtle forms of persuasion. Subservience to the leader or group requires members to cut ties with family and friends and radically alter their personal goals and activities they had before joining the group. The group is preoccupied with making money. Members are expected to devote inordinate amounts of time to the group and group-related activities. Members are encouraged or required to live and or socialize only with other group members. The most loyal members, the true believers, feel there can be no life outside the context of this group. They believe there is no other way to be and often fear reprisals to themselves or others if they leave or even consider leaving the group. Each cult has its own distinctive focus, but almost all of these groups share at least some elements in common, such as authoritarian control. Cultism hinges on encouraging maximum dependency. People in the cult must feel incapable of living an individual life outside the norms of the group. These beliefs go hand in hand with a worshipful attitude towards the group's authoritarian leader. Extremist beliefs. Cult members hold to very dogmatic and extreme beliefs. They also are unable to question these belief systems without fear of reprisal or punishment from the leader or other group members. Isolation from society. As soon as new members join a cult, other adherents work hard to isolate them from family members and friends. This helps fulfill the mind control aspirations of the leader. It also creates a hive mind of sorts between the new persons and other members. Veneration of a single individual. Charismatic leaders are often at the center of most cults. Consider the Manson family of the late 1960s. As their name suggests, they adopted the beliefs of their leader, Charles Manson, and fulfilled his requests. The same pattern repeats in almost all other cults, albeit to less violent ends in many cases.
And the peeps tick every single box. So, if it quacks like a cult and it waddles like a cult, well, I think there's a pretty good chance that it is a cult. On their refreshed website, there's a list of FAQs. One of the FAQs asks, do members have to cut ties with family if they leave the church? If so, why? And the answer they give includes, it is up to individual families as to how they manage and respond to these situations. The church would never stand in the way of families communicating with each other. At the end of the day, we are Christian, and we always seek to act with kindness and compassion. Just hang on, excuse me a minute. I've just got to pick up my jaw from the floor. What a staggering claim. I mean, it's got as much acquaintance with the truth as I have with Santa Claus, which is none. It's like, it's not how separation's been applied in the PBCC ever, and certainly not now. The answer to that FAQ should be, yes, the doctrine of separation does sometimes result in husbands and wives being divorced and parents cut off from their children and grandchildren and persons forced to leave their employment. It's not great PR, but at least it would be honest. And anyway, and then there's another FAQ that asks, what makes members of the PBCC any different to other Christians? And the answer it gives is, the only difference between us and other Christians is our commitment to fellowship. Fellowship is central to our faith, and we express this by only eating and drinking with those with whom we celebrate the Lord's Supper, commonly referred to as Holy Communion. So just hang on a minute. I'll just read that first part again. The only difference between us and other Christians, hang on, okay, is that they only eat and drink with other members. Well, I don't know. I mean, are they serious? If only that was the truth. I mean, I had this idea that honesty was a characteristic of a Christian, but please, brethren, can't you at least be honest? To bring in some personal stuff, after my daughter Lindy was withdrawn from about 15 years ago, we were forbidden from having any contact with her, implicitly at least, and explicitly to a certain extent. Without a doubt, we would have been shut up if we'd carried on having regular contact with her. Jackie and I saw her briefly 2 or 3 times, but not in our home and not with any of our other children present. They were very strained meetings. There was a lot of tears, and we even got a personal phone call from BDH once after Jackie had written to him asking for clarification about contact with her. He was very, very strong about having zero contact with her. He told us to return gifts and cards that she sent, and he even sort of cast a doubt as to whether we'd see her in heaven or at least recognize her.
Wow.
She wasn't a reprobate. She wasn't going on with anything the world would call sin. She'd had a real conversion a few years earlier after a young man in Auckland had been suddenly taken. That's brethren speak for died. He died suddenly. And she was quite close to this young brother. And she'd spent a lot of time studying the ministry and the Bible, and she'd had quite a real experience with Christ, and she was trying to walk according to the light of Christianity that she had received. But of course, in the brethren, that's not the way it works. You don't form your own links with Christ. You've got to get everything through man of God, don't you? So I've spent a bit of time over the past few days reading back through the letters that my wife and I wrote to BDH around that time, pleading for help. It's so distressing to relive all of that time, especially to realize there was absolutely nobody and nothing in the brethren, that not even the leader, who was so perfect and pure and so close to Christ, he could hear his heart beating, but nobody could provide answers to a teenage soul crying out for clarity. And Lindy could see that there was that the brethren, there are many things that the brethren held to in practice that couldn't be reconciled with scriptural teaching. And in one letter, we told BDH that she desperately wanted to see him face to face so that she could ask him for help and understanding about her questions. And we even told him that she believed that he was the only person who would have the answers that she was looking for. But she was never given the opportunity, and finally she came to it that she simply couldn't carry on living in contradiction to what she believed in. So despite the fact that she was very much a practicing Christian and probably put her faith into practice far more than most brethren were doing, we had to just completely cut her off. We couldn't have anything to do with her. One time she was at a cafe, sitting at a table outside a cafe, and my wife and youngest daughter walked past. She rushed up to them and tried to hug them. She was crying, like they effectively pushed her away, which I'm not being critical of. Of course, they were yearning to hug her back, sit down with her and cry with her and everything else, but they were just terrified of the consequences. And I guess they were terrified of getting poisoned by her. So I don't know how you reconcile all of that with the claim that the church would never stand in the way of families communicating with each other. It's just a totally false claim. The opposite's true. Lindy was in absolute anguish at being cut off from us. She desperate to maintain contact with us, but we had to cut her off. There's some unimaginably cruel things have been said to her in writing, which I won't even bring in here. And then, of course, moving on a little, the rat poison ministry that BDH gave in 2015 was a response to him being told that my son Braden had had some contact with Lindy. And that's all it was. They'd never met face to face. It was just a few short emails. Braden, he was suffering from a condition that had been exacerbated by the teaching in the general atmosphere among the brethren, and he felt that the only way to get help for his condition was to get away from the environment for a while. And so he had emailed Lindy a couple of times, just short emails to see how she's getting on, that sort of thing. BDH's reaction to the question was to say in a fellowship meeting, he might as well get a shot of what's the best thing to kill you quickly. What's that stuff? Cyanide? No, not cyanide, arsenic. How do you get arsenic into you? It'd be better to take arsenic or go and get some rat poison or something, take a bottle of it.
Still heart-wrenching to hear that every time.
Yeah.
So again, just to make it clear, when Bruce Hales talked about better to get arsenic or rat poison, he was referring specifically to Braden having a very tenuous email contact with his sister Lindy.
That's it. And then a month or two later, that was published and sent out to basically all the members of the PBCC around the world. And it wasn't edited out, not even softened at all.
Even had Braden's initials in, didn't it? So people could identify who he was speaking about.
Yeah, and his locality. So there was only there were only two people in that locality with those initials, and they were both of them were my sons. And other parts in the meeting were edited out. I know that for a fact, and that part could have easily been too. But he never withdrew it, never apologised. A few months later, I got a message from Bruce through a local brother asking me to write down, like send him a report as to how it had affected Braden, which I did. But Bruce never asked Braden personally how it had affected him. A few years later, Braden had the opportunity to go to Sydney, and he spoke face-to-face had a short conversation face-to-face with Bruce, and he never mentioned it. Never asked a single thing. So I don't know, how do you tie that up with the outrageous claim that the church doesn't stand in the way of family members communicating? Ministry given by the church's leader himself, never retracted, never modified, never apologised for. You're better off killing yourself than having any contact with your sister if she's not in fellowship. So I'm not claiming that Braden's perfect or Lindy or certainly not myself. It's not what I'm saying. And then about a year after Braden was withdrawn from, the Peebs did a dawn raid on Braden's house, trying to find some sort of incriminating material so that they could, I don't know, put him in jail or make him pay, an enormous fine so he'd be left destitute. They spent 3 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars using top lawyers trying to nail something onto him legally. But finally, after more than 3 years, they finally accepted that they were wasting their time and money. They dropped it, and without nailing anything onto him. And of course, didn't help that the brother who actually took the case against Braden had done exactly the same thing himself as they were trying to punish Braden.
I want to stop you for a second, because we're raised that when someone leaves the assembly and their position that they give up, that you are to cut them off in hopes that they will starve of this relationship that they're so used to, and that they come back. That's a big thing that they use. It's a tool they use, and that is bred into you from as young as I can remember. That's what you do. You cut them off in hopes that they'll come back, right? So this whole spiel that they've got going on, that they would never do that, it's a practice that has been going on for forever.
Forever, yeah. Well, since the 60s anyway.
Yeah.
In the light of that, here's a couple of extracts from the Faith and Practice, the Brethren's Charter, Clause 3, Subclause 6. Nor should these principles ever result in us acting other than in accordance with the law, or at any time in a manner that lacks compassion, care, or fails to pay due regard to the needs or vulnerabilities of others. A person who acts otherwise is not acting in accordance with our doctrine and beliefs. Okay, that's interesting. And then clause 6, subclause 8, where legal redress needs to be in relation to, I suppose it's in relation to breaches of the law affecting the church, a proportionate and preventative approach should be taken. Okay, so here's a young man against a super mega wealthy church engaging the best lawyers, and after 3 years they still never managed to find anything that they could actually nail on him, and they call this proportionate. Anyway, words fail me. In John's Gospel, there was, in John 8, I think it is, there's a group of scribes and Pharisees. It doesn't say how many there were, but and they were indignant at this terribly wicked woman who'd been caught with her pants down, as it were, and they were determined to stone her to death. That the law on their side, it was open and shut case. There was no allowance for mercy. Just kill her. The sooner the better. Ignore the feelings of her parents and siblings, and I don't know. She might have had children. Just whatever. Just kill her. Get rid of her. But what did the Lord say? Let him that is without sin among you first cast the stone at her. Isn't that just so potent? It's so potent. So how many of the super self-righteous brethren indignant at the wickedness of Braden and Lindy and Lance and Richard and Cheryl and thousands of others, myself, how many would step forward in the presence of Christ and be the first to cast a stone? They'd all just slink out, wouldn't they, one after the other, eldest to the youngest. The Pharisees knew they couldn't pull the wool over Jesus' eyes. They I guess they could sense that he knew all of their histories. But in the brethren, the priests are bold because they think they've got Bruce's authority behind them, and they think that's going to carry them through. They've had the wool pulled over their own eyes, and they're doing the same to the brethren generally. And they're all just going to be so ashamed. They'll just quietly try and slink out of sight when it comes home to them. Yes, well, yes, okay, yeah, maybe I have done worse things myself and mercy was shown to me. Or maybe I've been so clever at keeping it hidden, nobody knows the bad things I've done. So here's a challenge. Is there one single member of the brethren, Bruce included, who's prepared to stand up and publicly state that they haven't sinned as much as any of these persons whose lives have been destroyed by the brutality of separation? Anyone want to claim that they deserve to mercy and grace? That's why they haven't been dealt with? If so, please contact Cheryl on this Get a Life thing. Her details are down below. And tell her
we'll give you a podcast all of your own, and you can tell us all how good you've been.
Yeah. Info.getalife@proton.me.
Yeah.
Okay. There you go. And you'll
could open a comedy channel, couldn't we?
Probably get thousands of views, I guess. To bring it practical, why was Lance Christie withdrawn from? Okay, there was, maybe there was something. I don't know. I really don't know. But I know of many persons that have done far worse than what he was withdrawn from for, and the matters have been covered. What about the prominent brother who took a fellowship meeting in the States a year or two ago, spent on a Saturday, then spent Saturday night at a nightclub, went to the supper the next morning, and then took the reading, Lord's Day reading, and then made a 6-figure hush money payment to keep it quiet?
Yeah.
He probably,
A brother that has a very good chance of being the next so-called man of God for the whole of the Plymouth Brethren Christian cult. Yeah.
that's a bit terrifying.
Mm.
But he probably still made a profit, even after paying a six-figure hush money payout, because he probably got more than that back in gifts from the care meetings.
Yeah.
So Lance was withdrawn from because Bruce felt threatened by him. That's all. Bruce knows this. He knows also all about the matters of corruption that he's covered up, paid to keep quiet. Where's the consistency? Where's the justice? Come on. Wake up, brethren. Wake up.
Absolutely.
But wait, there's even more. So about a year ago, I got a letter from a couple of leading brothers in Auckland in which they said to me, you were withdrawn from for challenging and refusing to accept as right assembly judgments in other places and a refusal to accept witness. This was and is true and is further evidenced by your refusal to disassociate from Braden. You clearly don't accept the way the brethren apply assembly discipline. And they also, a little bit further down, they said, you know, we have held for years that separation should be moral, physical, and legal. So the background to this is that after Braden was withdrawn from, I was put under enormous pressure from my family, from responsible brethren and others to sack him from my business, to cut him off totally and completely. One message that I got included, I think you should give Braden not 1 cent. Make him pay back his loan. Any money you give him now will go directly towards helping support and fund those whose ultimate aim is to see Mr. Hales thrown in prison. They'll stop at nothing in their hatred of him. Braden are the same. If you give him nothing, at least some of his time and resource and energy will be spent thinking about that, instead of literally landing out there in a house with cash and time, already Lance's right-hand man, all completely set up with everything he needs to make Mr. Hales and the brethren's life hell. Why should you do that? How can it possibly be right? Give him not 1 cent. Let him put his resource into thinking about that. Stand in the breach for Mr. Hales and deflect some of the resource that'll otherwise be used to fight him.
Wow.
So, okay, I'm just trying to reconcile that with the claims. So, I mean, I was ashamed of the way I'd cut Lindy off more than 10 years before. And I just literally, I could not treat my son in the way they were trying to force me to. As a father and as a Christian, I just could not act in such a godless way. I was willing to try and work out some way of trying to continue to employ him while keeping contact to a minimum, just to keep in touch, make sure he was okay. But nothing short of complete, total ostracism was going to be acceptable. On the website claim, it's up to the individual families how to manage and respond. Well, if that was true, why was I put under so much pressure to cut him off? They should have left me to respond in a way I felt was right, according to my own conscience and responsibility. So obviously, I don't know who's ultimately responsible for what is on the PB website, but whoever it is, you're lying when you claim the church doesn't stand in the way of families communicating. That's just a lie. Perhaps you're being deliberately deceptive in the way it's worded. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't even refer to families when one member's not in fellowship. If so, it's almost more shocking than just if it was an outright lie.
And there was another article that was just put out on the weekend here. called Brethren Uncomfortable in the Spotlight, and this covers pretty much everything that we're already covering here. It goes on to say, recent media coverage seems to have stung members of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. The church, regular readers will recall it was once known as the Exclusive Brethren, has distributed a letter to all its congregations worldwide announcing refreshed public engagement activity as a response to misinformation in the media. Oh dear, surely not us. There are a small number of media outlets who have written about our church in the past and got the facts wrong, a spokesman told CBD. Papers like The Age are not independent always as promised, with one journalist there even recently admitting in print that he has run an 18-year-old campaign against us. J'accuse. In fact, our esteemed colleague, Michael Batchelor, did not admit to a campaign against them. He merely pointed out he'd been writing about the church for 18 years. The Brethren's new website purports to tell the truth about our church, contribution, values, and way of life. Intrigued, we read how the Brethren's public-facing charity Rapid Relief Team was made up of Brethren's members who helped people in emergencies. But thought we should note this newspaper's previous reportage about Australian tax office raids on businesses in Goulburn whose owners helped to run the Rapid Relief Team. What really struck us, though, was the website's defense of the doctrine of separation after allegations that the church encourages families to cut off excommunicated members. The church would never stand in the way of families communicating with each other, says the website. This masthead has reported before how a New Zealand man, Steve Simmons, was kicked out of the church. Now a letter to his father, also excommunicated, has come to light. Two Brethren heavies explained that one reason he'd been kicked out a few years after his son was his refusal to disassociate from Braden. He'd been poisoned by darkness, they wrote. You know, we have held for years separation should be moral, physical, and legal, the pair wrote. When CBD asked about this contradiction, the church said it was very rare to ask people to leave, and it would never stand in the way of families communicating with each other. We can confirm there was a case in New Zealand where there were various significant reasons that we asked contact to be ceased with a former member, the church spokesman said. But our jaws really dropped when we read from the same letter to Simmons that the two Auckland priests defended the church's man of God, Bruce Hales, and particularly the size of his mega mansion, one of the biggest and most opulent in Sydney's East Wood. He lives in a comfortable, fairly ordinary house. His lounge is no bigger than ours, says the New Zealand enforcers. If only. This is the absurdity that they dig themselves into, because we know that this isn't just an isolated incident that they ceased family being in contact with someone who's left. And again, when we come back to the house, I mean, he's living in a mansion, but then they're all living in mansions, so it does seem like a normal house to them. But again, this is just absolutely full of lies. Everything that we've been discussing here again. I want to read out also a piece of ministry from Bruce. It's from a 3-day meeting at Tarana, Saturday, March 17th of 2007. Someone is asking, I was just wondering whether the contact, in the light of what you're saying as to the committal to the assembly and the testimony being under attack, whether we need to be extra careful in any contact with persons that are not related to the position. BDH says, you mean under discipline or worldly people? And the person says, I mean persons that are under discipline or not available. So when someone calls someone under discipline, it means someone who has left the church or they've been shut up or they're not allowed to go to meeting. And Bruce says, well, we shouldn't have any contact with them. Of course, should we? I think there's been a lot of going back. That's what I'm aware of. Shouldn't have any contact with persons under discipline. Why would we? Why would we be having contact with persons under discipline? That's a matter for priestly concern and activity. Principles of God's house must be maintained. I have to admit it's a bit shocking how such accurate information gets out so quickly. Someone's letting it out. Someone's giving it out somewhere. It hasn't just come out of the air. It doesn't get printed up by these sign writers, you know. Those, do you get them over there? They write in the sky. Do you get much of that over there? BDH goes on to say, but I was just thinking about these news people. They have a set number of papers. Pages that they've got to print, you see. They have it all set up. So when they've got no news, they just got to fill it up. It doesn't look good. It wouldn't look good for the paper if they had blank sheets, would it? But really, they'd probably get their messages across better if they just had 40 blank sheets and 2 pages of news or something. They've got to fill it up. That's journalism. Journalists are con men and con women too. JSH said that. The man of sin would be a journalist. I think that's very interesting. That's why we want to be. We realize the characters of persons really that you're up against. You're up against liars. The man of sin will be a liar. They're not interested in the truth. The truth is not worth printing. Mostly it's not worth printing. It's not interesting enough. So they have to embellish it and twist it with lies and falsehoods to make it interesting. Anyway, that's that. So one thing I want to say here is we're 18 years later and we still have the insiders sending us messages. We still have journalists that every time I've sat down with them are kind, compassionate, empathetic, and just wanting to deliver the truth of what this cult is like. And we have the frank news inside the PBCC that we have proven on other podcasts of an article that they took and then twisted what the words were and delivered it to their members, literally leaving out important information about a car accident. And this isn't the first time that it's happened. So, Bruce, who really is the con man? Who is the liar? Who is deceiving 50,000 followers of finances, of fraud? Everything that you said 18 years ago, you have developed into.
The best thing you could do is to freely admit that the church has erred gravely in the past, that it has indeed broken up thousands of marriages and family relationships, and then say you're committed to changing from now on, and then actually change. Stop this cruelty. Stop driving wedges between husbands and wives, between parents and children. You've got a written charter which spells out how you're supposed to put your faith into practice. You should read it at least once a week and put it into practice.
Yeah, I agree.
And
Yeah.
can I just give a little background to that faith in practice charter? In 2000 and I think it was around 2008, the Brethren's meeting room trusts in the UK had their charitable status withdrawn, which sparked a major legal battle that wasn't resolved for several years. And the reason it was withdrawn is because the Charity Commission in the UK said they had no evidence that the Brethren provided any public benefit that would justify them being regarded as a charity. They said you're operating as a private club, you're not benefiting the public, and on top of that, you are actually a public menace because your practice of separation is breaking up families and leaving people without jobs and destitute and causing all manner of distress. And the Brethren poured millions into legal and public relations and lobbying, everything they could to try and get this reversed. And the reason is that if they lost their charitable status, it would cost them hundreds of millions of dollars because they would actually lose. The government would have to repurpose their assets for charitable uses, but also, of course, all the money that flows into the Brethren gets a charitable tax bonus. It's tax-free. So the Brethren could see after all their legal appeals that they were going to lose the case. And so in desperation, they came up with this charter, this faith in practice document, which basically said, without admitting that they had done all these awful things, it said, we're not going to break up families. We're going to treat everyone with kindness and compassion. Even if you've left the church, you can still come back and see your family. You can still come to our church meetings, and everything's going to be different now. And that faith in practice document was inserted into the trust deed of every single meeting room trust in the UK. And that was the condition under which they were re-granted their charitable status. Every single trust had to insert that. It was read out in the meeting hall of every congregation in the United Kingdom, and everyone had to assent to it. And so they gained, over time, what would be hundreds of millions of pounds worth of charitable advantage, tax advantage, by everyone agreeing to and assenting to abide by that document. Now, a few weeks after that had been read out, because I was in the Brethren at the time this was all happening, a few weeks after that had been read out in the church, and everyone had been handed a copy to read, which they then had to hand back for some mysterious reason, we were told verbally that Bruce Hales has said, in connection with that specific faith in practice document, Bruce Hales has said, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. In other words, everyone inside there knows that that document is a false front, and we're not to regard it or go by it, despite the fact that it says in the document that it is included in the ministry. Bruce Hales privately sends a message to say, in effect, ignore that. That's just for public consumption. Everything is exactly as it was before. And on that false and blatantly lying basis, they're currently claiming hundreds of millions of dollars in tax advantage, which is where the government pays back 20 to 30% of the tax to the charity that's receiving it, on the basis that it is now not doing these harmful practices that it had done in the past. That's the background of the Faith in Practice document, which is on the Brethren's website in the UK.
And I just want to, on that note, I want to read out another part of that letter that you had. And this is just something about BDH that they had talked about in the letter. He is a giver and uses what he has for the advantage of others. As for attacking his lifestyle, he has spent his life helping others to the detriment of his own health, which again, lies beyond lies. We're on, 136 podcasts in on this, and he never answered my letter after I was out, after I had some priests come at me. I wrote him a letter, sent it to them. He never ever responded to me. There's many people that he has denied access and denied a meeting with. And again, if you are going on this whole, at the end of the day, we are Christian and we always seek to act with kindness and compassion, why have you not, after 136 podcasts, have you asked to speak to all of the people who have done a podcast because they have not been heard? What they agreed to within the faith and practice has never been upheld, has never been dealt with. They don't practice it. And BDH does not spend his life helping others to the detriment of his own health. The detriment of his own health has to do with the moral compass he holds, has to do with the amount of alcohol he drinks, and he's sitting there acting like this man of God and does nothing in his life that attributes him to those three words, man of God.
And if you think he's a giver, just take a careful look at the direction the money flows in throughout the entire Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. The money goes from the grassroots members and it filters up and up and up, and it ends up in the hands of Bruce Hales and his immediate circle of friends and family.
And we shouldn't be getting messages or phone calls from insiders that are completely broke and destitute with no money. Like this, it's just not all adding up, right? And we have better things to do with our life than sit here and do this day in and day out. We do this because we have family in there, but we do have better things to do. And so when these insiders come in with this information and we relay it back to you, this is not us making up things, as you guys also, many of you claim to do. This is literally insiders that are going through these horrible times and that have no access to anything, whether that be mental health, whether that be finances, whether that be moral support. They don't have it. So they reach out to us for it.
Can I just say too, in the trust deeds, which were amended, as Richard just said, but there's a definition in the trust deed of whether of what makes a person in fellowship. And that definition includes that they believe in the Holy Scriptures and they uphold core doctrine and the faith and practice parts, additions or appendices to the trust deed. That is a definition of whether you're in fellowship or not, that you believe in and uphold faith and practice.
Wow.
So how many of the brethren believe in and uphold the faith and practice document? If you're not doing that, if you're not going by the faith and practice document, you're not even in fellowship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I could go on, but we're trying to keep the podcast to a reasonable length. So to go back to the statement on the website, they say, at the end of the day, we are Christian, and we always seek to act with kindness and compassion. So let's have a look how that stands up. Over the past few years, there's been, in fact, throughout pretty much all of my lifetime, there's been thousands of cases of just incredible, heartless, callous cruelty, neglect, and persecution. And pretty much every single one of the podcasts, Get Aloft podcast, has been a heartbreaking story of the exact opposite of kindness and compassion. And there's obviously thousands more stories that haven't been told. So I'm a little bit ashamed to bring forward any of my own experiences, which are nothing compared to what many others have been through. I was shut up or confined in February 2020. That's 5 years ago this month, because I was deeply concerned about unchristian things going on in the church, and I just simply couldn't get satisfactory answers to my questions. And then I was withdrawn from or excommunicated 2 years later in February 2022 because I was still carrying the same concerns. And I remember it being said since the 70s in the Brethren that it's more likely that the sun won't rise than that the man of God would fail. And so I guess I was pretty confused because the man that was supposed to be the man of God had failed big time, but the sun was still rising every day. In the past 3 or 4 years, there's been a lot of legal toing and froing as to my personal matters. Enormous amounts paid to lawyers and so on, and enormous amount of hours wasted. And I've protested time and time again that where there's two Christians trying to resolve any matter, if they're committed to truth and justice and to kindness and compassion, as it says on the website, they should be able to resolve matters easily by acting according to scriptural principles. I guess you'd still need lawyers to just complete some paperwork and so on, but I just cannot understand why it would need hugely expensive King's Counsel lawyers combing through every financial document going back 20 years just to see whether I've, kept some money aside for myself or something. I don't know what they're looking for. More than once, I've made a solemn written committal to provide for my wife and children to the extent of my ability for as long as I live. I've provided that to my wife, to my children, to the brothers. This is not a light committal. It was in writing with my signature on it, made before God. I've said what I'll do. I'll provide as generously as I can for my wife and children, but it's not acceptable, apparently, and they're just spending tens of thousands of dollars on lawyers and everything else just to try and screw me out, screw as much as they can out of me. It's just totally out of accord with their claims as to kindness and compassion. And then about a month ago, my lawyer forwarded me a document from the Ministry of Justice telling me that my marriage had been dissolved. It was final and it couldn't be appealed. just like that, after nearly 42 years, my status had suddenly changed from married to divorced without my knowledge or my consent.
Oh, that's awful.
I mean, I'm asserting here in a public forum there was no scriptural or moral basis for this divorce. It's only come about because of a man who knew that he had risked losing all of his power and his glory and wealth and possibly even his liberty if I wasn't excommunicated and silenced and discredited in the eyes of the brethren. So in the Faith and Practice Charter, there's a clause which is titled compassion, and it spells out two very rare reasons for excommunication. One is if a person leaves and separates themselves from the assembly entirely of their own personal decision and accord. That's one reason. And the second is in other very rare cases where excommunication is necessary as an extreme or last resort measure for serious misdeeds wholly at odds with basic scriptural teaching. So that's the two reasons that they told the UK government that they would use for excommunication. I'd just been trying to expose fraud, corruption, and cruel mistreatment of persons, but apparently, that's wholly at odds with basic scriptural teaching? No. So my excommunication just simply doesn't stand up. Since I was withdrawn from, I've continued living the same lifestyle I always lived, except of course I don't go to a meeting every day. I work long hours. I try and keep active. Not on any social media apart from LinkedIn. I don't spend hours on anti-brethren chats or anything else, but it's just the cruelty and the hypocrisy and the lies and the fraud. It just riles me no end. I just cannot ignore it, especially when so many persons that I love and care about are caught up in it. And that's the only reason I'm speaking out in this way. I've got 4 grandchildren who live within 2 or 3 kilometres of my work. As far as I know, it's still only 4. I wouldn't really know. One of them I've never even seen. I saw one photo shortly after he was born. I've got another granddaughter who lives about 600 metres from my house. Never seen a photo. I only even know she exists because someone told Lindy. Got a couple of grandkids and living in Canada I've never seen. Nobody's even sent me photos. I've asked for photos. My email wasn't answered. I've sent gifts. I've never received any acknowledgement or thanks. So if this is kindness and compassion, I'd know I'd hate to think what indifference looks like, or let alone cruelty. Then here's another example of the moral, I don't know whether depravity is too strong a word or not, but resulting from the obsession with material success that marks the brethren nowadays. It's pretty obvious, isn't it, that the PBCC's just turned into a prosperity cult. Decent people, they're decent people, reasonably high standards, keeping separate from the peasants and the ruffians and so on, obsessed with making money, having enormous mansions, flash limousines, the best of everything. I don't want to make too much of a big deal of any of this, but I've just got a small business employing 11 or 12 people, and we make a small range of specialized hydraulic lifting equipment that I've developed over the past 35 years or so. I don't believe in copying other people's ideas. I like to come up with my own products. We had some patents and registered designs and so on, but they don't last forever. The market for them is very small, but it's been enough to keep us busy. And the New Zealand market's far too small to survive off. So our main market's been Australia for the past, I don't know, 20, 25 years. So we've sold mainly through agents into Australia. We had a mix of brethren and non-brethren agents. And a couple of non-brethren businesses in Australia tried making similar machines, but they weren't very successful. So we largely had that market to ourselves. But not long after I was shut up, this is 3 or 4 years ago, a business called Sightcraft Materials Handling, which is owned by Richard Garrett of Melbourne, they started making machines which were based on ours and selling them aggressively to our customers. One of the machines they copied was almost identical to one of ours. And another machine they made copied or incorporated a feature on which we had a current registered design, which they just ignored. They knew who our customers were. They'd been our best agent by a long way for years. They'd sold millions of dollars worth of our equipment, knew everything about our machines, the customers, the servicing, the maintenance, everything. They even directly copied our manuals. They just replaced the brand name. And then 3 other brethren agents, one in Perth, one in Sydney, and one in somewhere else in New South Wales, they continued buying from us until about 6 or 8 months ago, which we appreciated. And we supported them by directing inquiries to them that we'd got from our own advertising. Like we would have directed hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of sales to them over the past 2 or 3 years. And then suddenly, without any notification, 2 of them started selling the Sightcraft copies of our machines. But on their websites, any inquiries for our machines were automatically redirected to the Sightcraft machines.
Wow.
So we, when we found out, we wrote and asked them to take our machines off their websites and to delete the redirect links, and which I think they did. But it's pretty obvious they were put under a lot of pressure to stop dealing with us from probably after the podcasts a year ago. But then a guy called David Ovenden from Sydney put machines on his website that are basically identical to our 2 best sellers, to the machines that pay our bills. He'd obviously sent a couple of our machines to China, had them reverse engineered, and now he's importing almost exact copies of our machines from China.
Wow.
He's plainly and just doing it to destroy our market. He's undercutting our prices and aggressively marketing to our customers. He's obviously very successful. He's generally speaking, he's building he's got a brand new, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000 square meter building. Sightcraft they copied one of our, did a pretty much exact copy of one of our machines.
Yeah.
That's Sightcraft, and that was about 2 or 3 years ago. But this Verdex one is just happened 3 or 4 months ago.
Yeah.
But so that picture that's up now is the Sightcraft thing, which has been,
that's the first one you're speaking about.
Yes.
Yeah. And then
this one here and is an exact copy. Like if apart from the fact that the colors are different.
That's the Verdex, yeah. And then what was the third one? What's
this one here?
That's also Verdex, so that's another one they've copied.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. Got it.
Yeah.
And if you're as an engineer or as a person who actually designed the original equipment, I can look at the copy and see that every minute detail, apart from the obvious cosmetic changes, is exactly the same. Like you look at there's a red emergency stop, there's the shape of the handle, there's the shape of the whole body of the machine, there's everything.
You don't need to be an engineer to see that one's a copy of the other.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So they've obviously painted them in different colors and made a couple of minor cosmetic changes. I won't bore anyone by going into the details, but almost every minute detail is exactly the same. And just the same as Richard Garrett from Melbourne, the documentation that they hand out is taken directly from ours. They just changed the brand names. So now in Australia, there's 4 Brethren businesses plus us, plus a couple of small non-Brethren businesses selling equipment that I developed into a small niche market that can really only support one player. And please don't try to tell me that this is not a deliberate campaign, because it obviously is.
Absolutely.
They're not in it to make money, these guys. That they've got extensive product lines that are bringing far more profit, far more money than they'll ever get from selling these machines. It's obvious that the only aim is to destroy our biggest market, which is Bruce all over. He's just a petty, spiteful, mean and nasty man. And this is his way of getting revenge.
Yeah, I agree.
All these guys are all mega millionaires, for pity's sake. None of them need to do this. It's the sort of thing that you'd expect from godless persons, from godless cultures like China, not from professing Christians. What David Ovenden has done is just so blatant, so godless, so unethical that I actually suspect that he was probably instructed by the PB hierarchy to do it, and then to just sit back and wait for us to take him to court. And they could easily afford to support him by throwing him a few $100,000 or $1 million or so to defend it, while I went quietly broke trying to get justice. So it'll be interesting to see whether they're blessed in their venture, because karma's a very real thing, isn't it?
Absolutely, it is.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious as to whether, like, the run-of-the-mill brethren, if any watch this podcast, do you think that's okay? Is that justified? Do you think it's justified in the circumstances? Because I'm excommunicated, do you think it's okay for persons in fellowship, prominent in fellowship, to do that? Is it an example of showing kindness and compassion? Are these statements on the Brethren website, are they true or false? So there's a couple of ways they could make the claims true. One would be to put actual true statements up, say, admit that you do break up families and you treat ex-members with cruelty and carelessness and so on, leave them on the scrap heap. But the other way would be to leave those statements there and then change your way of life so that you actually do what you say. Read the faith and practice document, which has been sanctioned by the minister of the Lord, so it says, so it must be right, and actually do what it says. And if it says that brethren shouldn't do certain things or shouldn't act in a certain way, well, stop doing those things. It's not that difficult a concept to grasp, is it? If you think about it carefully, I think you'll find that it's actually practical Christianity.
And I want to let everybody know that on every single podcast, there's always a link to the faith and practice document. So it is readily available. There's Dropbox links for it for the insiders. Like for those that are really questioning everything that's going on, go through and read it. So you yourself also know your rights before you leave, and also your rights for those if you do have family on the outside, that if you have someone telling you that you can't do certain things, and yet you know that in the faith and practice document, it clearly states out that you can, like, challenge them. This is the way that we get change. This is the way that you get to be able to be inside there and make the actual transformations that have to happen that haven't happened yet. So go through it very carefully and get to know it very well, just like you know the Bible. Know the faith and practice document the exact same, because it is what is going to be your key in your back pocket when priests come at you.
I wanted to bring up another point about family trust deeds. This is sort of changing gears a little bit here, but any brethren who've got a trust, a family trust, especially if it owns shares in the business or whatever, they need to urgently have a look at the wording, at the clauses that are in the deed. I've got a family trust which was set up in 2006. My father, he was an accountant, and he basically drew up the deed for me. And as far as I know, he used a template which had been drawn up for the brethren around the world to use. And it's got some very dangerous clauses in it which can be used to strip you of any assets that are held in the trust. So my deed owns 90% of the shares in my business. Originally, it included the following clauses. It made reference to the brethren, and it defined brethren as those Christians forming part of the worldwide fellowship who hold and practice the teachings of Christ and his apostles contained in the Holy Scriptures, as expounded by the ministers of the Lord in the recovery, so on and so on, and are in fellowship with Mr. B.D. Hales, so long as he lives, and after his death with any other person who for the time being is recognized by the fellowship worldwide as the successor, as minister of the Lord in the recovery, and no one who is outside that fellowship is eligible to become or remain a trustee. That is very important to think about.
I think it's super important to point out here to those spokespersons of the Plymouth Brethren Christian cult and how they talk about how there's no hierarchy, but in here they name every single man of God and then talk about the successor as the minister of the Lord in the recovery. It is right here in black and white. All of their leaders, they have a hierarchical system, they have a man of God, and they have someone that governs the whole thing.
A later clause is appointment of a sole trustee contains the wording that each director is and remains a member of the brethren.
Wow.
And then there's a clause, trustee must be a member of the brethren. No person shall, nor shall they be eligible to be appointed or remain as a trustee unless he or she is at all material times a member of the brethren. Deemed retirement, any trustee who ceases to be a member of the brethren shall be deemed to have immediately retired as a trustee on the date that they ceased to be a member of the, as aforesaid. And then there is a clause, the provisions of clause 17.9 and 17.11 shall be of no application if at any time neither of the settlers while they're living are members of the brethren. So in other words, I think that means if a husband and wife were both withdrawn from, the clauses do not apply. But these are very, very dangerous clauses. I think they were what was used against Lance Christie. His business, I think, was owned by the trust, and the date he was withdrawn from, he was removed from the trust. He was deemed to have retired from the trust in accordance with those clauses, and so thus he effectively lost millions of pounds of assets that he'd laboured, all his life to build up, and it's happened to others as well. So you might think, well, I've got no intention of leaving the brethren, so I'm happy to leave those clauses in, and neither did I. I didn't intend to leave the brethren. Scary thing is that if you've got those clauses in your deed, what you've done is you've handed over the final authority over your affairs to a very fallible man living in a mansion in Sydney, and who with a few words he could just whip out the lot right from under your nose. You'd hardly even know what happened. He doesn't have to have a scriptural basis. He didn't with me. He holds so much sway that responsible persons in your locality, they won't raise a question. Neither will anyone else in your locality. You'll suddenly find yourself on the scrap heap with only a few rags and scraps. And of course, it doesn't stand up legally, and you can contest it in court and so on. But as Lance and others know, you've got to spend tens of thousands of pounds or dollars on lawyers to try and contest it, to get your share of the money back. And there's nothing, I can tell you, there is nothing more demoralizing than fighting with your own wife and family after you've spent your whole life providing for them. This is just a bit of a diversion, but can I just say to Jed Christie and anyone else who supported him in that recent court case against Lance, what you did in taking your father to court, trying to get him put in jail, is disgusting and deplorable. I can scarcely imagine a more low-down action than for a son to take his own father to court for anything, let alone something as pathetic as your feeble claim. Thank God for a judge with sense. Just to get back to what I was saying about trust deeds, I was warned about these clauses around the time that I was shut up. So I fortunately managed to get the clauses taken out of the deed before I was withdrawn from. But it was a real battle. The priest tried to talk me out of it, and Jackie, she had to sign she had to agree to changes because she was also a trustee and a settler. And I had a very difficult job getting her to agree to it. But if I hadn't managed to get them taken out, my life would be just completely different now. I'd probably be destitute, and Bruce would have had another notch in his hatchet. I'm also a trustee of my parents' trust. They both died now, but the trust they set up still owns the house that they lived in, which my sister lives in now. And there's been a massive effort to try and force me to resign using the same clauses with lawyers and letters and threat. They threatened me with court cases and all that sort of stuff. So, but I've actually offered to resign, but on the condition that my brother and my brother was a trustee as well, and my brother-in-law, who's going to replace me, if they'll establish their credentials as being in fellowship by providing me a written statement that they believe in and uphold the faith and practice document, well, I'll resign. That's what I've said. I've said it in writing. And because the Preston Down trustee clearly defines a person in fellowship as someone who believes and follows Holy Scripture and upholds the core doctrine and practices summarized in Schedules 1 and 2 to this deed. But they're not prepared to do that. They'd rather spend thousands of dollars on lawyers trying to force me out than to just simply say that they agree with and uphold the core doctrine, faith and practice document, which they're refusing to do.
Yeah. Which document was specifically approved by Bruce Hales himself and is stated to be part of the ministry.
Yeah. I've publicly stated in writing that I believe in and uphold the document, so technically I'm in fellowship and they're not. I meet the requirements of being a trustee and they don't. But when you think about it, it's horrifying to think that some guy in Australia has been given the power to override and interfere in personal property affairs of thousands of persons all over the world. I mean, what right why should the minister of the Lord in the recovery be even included in a family trust deed? It makes no sense. He's kind of weaseled his way into almost every single facet of Brethren life. In the Preston Down trust deed, which is like a template for all the UK hall trusts, there are 20 references to the minister of the Lord in the recovery. 20. The trust deeds give him so much power. If you look at it, if you study it closely, which I've done, he can basically do whatever he pleases with the assets.
Yeah.
Same with family trust deeds. You urgently need to look at your own deeds and see what the wording is in them.
What a way to have control, though, right? Like this everything that you've pointed out here shows how this is how they gain control of keeping people in and using this fear. I mean, this isn't the first time that I've heard of this. This comes up in many people who want to leave, like whole families that want to leave, and they get caught in a lot of things like this. So this is really great that you're laying this out in black and white for everybody to see exactly what you've been through trying to come to some sort of resolution, right?
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is that if I was in the Brethren, and of course I was for so many years, and I understand how you think in there, you would say, well, whatever happens, I'm always going to stick by Bruce Hales.
Yeah.
And so I don't need to worry about this, because even if there's a major split in the Brethren, I will go with the portion that stays with Bruce. Now, Bruce is very elderly and he's very sick. At some point, he's going to go to the great rehab in the sky, and then you've got a situation where your trust deed and all your assets are no longer in the name of Bruce Hales. They're in the name of whoever the Brethren universally recognize as being the minister of the Lord in the recovery. And we know it has to be a Hales, because the Brethren can't even imagine a future without a Hales at the helm of it. Now, who's it going to be? Is it going to be Dean, the one who's got a little bit of brain and is a little bit balanced? Or is it going to be his older brother, Garrett, the one who is basically a loose cannon, a bull in a china shop? And can you imagine either of those two extremely egotistical and strong-willed characters ever meekly bowing down and acknowledging their brother as being the next man of God while they have to take a subservient position? I mean, look what happened to Daniel Hales after Bruce gets in. Daniel Hales, the older brother, is publicly humiliated and dragged over the coals and beaten into submission to make sure that he has to publicly and humbly acknowledge that his younger brother Bruce is the big chief. Can you imagine either Dean or Gareth having witnessed that, putting themselves in a position where their brother can publicly beat them down and humiliate them? I mean, this is the story as old as the history of mankind. When, in the old days, a king, a monarch dies, the princes, the heirs to the throne, start bitterly fighting amongst each other who's going to take the succession. So let's imagine that you say, okay, Bruce has died, big shock. What's going to happen next? What happens if the guy that you decide is the next man of God isn't the guy who actually gets to be on the trust deeds for the next round? So you're backing the Garethites, but actually the Brethren universally decide that the Deanites are the ones who are going to inherit all this wealth. Then all your money, all your assets have gone. So don't tie your money and your possessions and your hard-earned wealth to something that inevitably within a few short years or even months is going to be completely up in the air, because you don't know what's going to happen when Bruce goes. So just put it back in your own name, and then it's under your own control. And whatever you decide to do, whoever you decide to go with, whatever your convictions are about the testimony, whether it's right or wrong or who leads it, it's under your control, and it'll go with you wherever you go. Because I don't think it's strictly in scripture in these words, but there's a proverb that says, "A fool and his money are soon parted."
Well said.
The fact is that if Bruce doesn't like someone, he can conjure up some fake charges against them. The congregation and the place will do exactly what he says with little or no question or exercise. Before you know it, your whole life will be turned completely upside down. And it's even, in some cases, it's led to suicides or attempted ones.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Brethren need to take this extremely seriously, need to take urgent steps to get rid of any such clauses from their trust deeds, and especially if the trust owns a business or some other significant asset. this is another story, but in actual fact, you need to look at the trust deeds that for your local halls and everything else too, because you'll suddenly find if there's a split, if there's a crisis and so on, that you'll find that all your school assets, all your local halls, your main halls, everything is all funneled back into Bruce's pockets, and all the brethren will be left with nothing.
And even if Bruce doesn't pass away in the next little bit, we have the ATO results that are looming over top of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church, right? And that is bound to bring a massive set of chaos inside there. So it's one of those things that you just need to take care of this stuff now.
I mean, the other thing I would add is, if you've got elderly parents, go and check out what they have in their will. I mean, my own experience was this, my own family experience is that my brother, who is a very, very faithful member of the Plymouth Brethren, completely committed to Bruce Hales, went and, just fairly randomly, I don't know what inspired him to do it. He went round to see my parents and had a look at their will. And he was horrified to find that they were giving away all their money, or a very large proportion of it, to a whole series of brethren trusts, like the Grace Trust and the local meeting room trust and so on. And my brother said to them, look, you have got a family, we have to survive after you passed away. You shouldn't be giving all this away, which is very, very surprising because my brother is, as I say, very committed. And he actually, persuaded them to, make some small donations to Brethren Trust. But, this is family money. You shouldn't just be handing this all out. And of course, the problem is that particularly, when people get a lot older, they're less able to see through the propaganda. And of course, the Brethren propaganda is that we desperately need money for our schools. And if we don't have all this money flowing in for one school global, we won't be able to run it next year. And the reality is that they've got 1.2 billion Australian dollars sitting in charitable funds that they're not using. They absolutely do not need any more legacies. But you, as a family, whether or not you get to inherit the value of your parents' assets, the value of their house, is going to make a huge difference to your life. So just go and visit your elderly relatives, your elderly aunt and your parents, and just make sure that some of these very sneaky trustees haven't got their ear and persuaded them to hand over all or most of their assets to swell that 1.2 billion pile of cash that the brethren have absolutely no need for.
And I mean, the Hales know what they're doing, right? And it is in my personal opinion, watching what's going on down there, that if I was sitting in there and I was awake to what's going on, I would be starting to question, okay, if everything does fall in here, do you not think that maybe because the Hales have so much access to this, that they'll just scoop that up and disappear? Like, it's a very easy thing for them to do, just to grab that pile of money, and before you know it, they're gone. You never hear from them again. Like, those kinds of questions should be in your head.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, just to make it clear, I'm not getting anything out of my parents' will, obviously, because
Not in my eye, me either.
but at least I know that money will be going to my children that are in, so that's fine. I'm good with that. What I don't want to see, and what even my very committed and upright brother who's in there didn't want to see, was all this family money going straight into this completely unusable pile of cash that's under the control of Bruce D. Hales.
Yeah.
As the faith and practice document, you'd expect, as Richard said, you expect every single member of the PBCC, especially anyone who takes responsibility, that if they were challenged, they'd have no hesitation in making a declaration that they uphold the core doctrine and the practice. But I've tried time and time and time again. I cannot get one single person to admit to it. My brother would, for example, he would believe in it. He would go along with it, say it's right, but he's obviously, like, it left to himself, he'd probably have no hesitation in agreeing with it. But he's obviously asked someone higher up in the meeting, you know, what should I do? Steve's asked me about this, and oh, no, whatever you do, don't agree with it, because as soon as anyone agrees that it's right and should be upheld, that then opens the way for all sorts of stuff to happen.
That opens the floodgates, doesn't it?
Yeah. There's a clause in it, as Richard referred to earlier, which basically equates its authority with ministry.
Yes.
Clause 3.3 says they exercise this judgment based on their understanding and appreciation of Holy Scripture, the guidance provided in ministry, and then brackets, now including this statement of doctrinal principle, close the brackets, and the exemplary practice of fellow members of the community. So here's a challenge to Lloyd Grimshaw and Doug Watt and all the other spokesmen for the PBCC around the world. Are you prepared to make a public declaration confirming that every member of the PBCC should uphold the core doctrine and practices summarised in the documents appended to the amendment to the Preston Down Trust Deed? If not, why not? Your website says at the end of the day, we are Christian. Okay, prove it. Prove it by your actions. You've got a charter that spells out in detail how you put your faith into practice. Why can't you openly and freely commit to upholding it? If you want to polish up your image to the world, that's the best place to start.
Yeah.
I've just got a final message for any responsible persons that are surrounding Bruce and supporting him and carrying out his instructions, which I've got no idea who that includes these days, because it's been 5 years since I've been to a meeting. I suppose it includes Bruce's sons and John Anderson and whoever that Thorncroft guy, whatever his name is, and Lloyd Grimshaw, and of course all the dozens, hundreds of loyal enforcers around the world who do all the dirty work. You know that all this dishonesty and cruelty and fraud and corruption is not Christianity. You've got too much to lose from making a stand. You've destroyed the lives of others who tried to make a stand, and it'd be too humiliating for you to back down now, to admit that you're wrong. But do not think that you'll escape judgment. God will hold you to account for all the fraud and cruelty and dishonesty, all the unpriestly activity, all the covering of iniquity that you've had a part in or enabled, all the prominence, the gifts from care meetings around the world, the front seats in the special meetings, the number of times your initials have appeared in the white books, taking fellowship meetings, whatever. See how you get on pleading all those things and to the righteous judge in the day of judgment. You'd better take care in case he says to you, "Depart from me, workers of iniquity, I never knew you." So it's not too late to change. You've hitched your wagon to Bruce. It's carried you through until now, but it will not take you all the way through. He cannot take you through what's coming. But there is one who can, and that's Jesus himself, and I urge you to find him before it's too late.
Sometimes I wonder, because they've removed themselves so far from Christianity, that if they ever even have sat down and asked themselves, do I really believe in this? Do I believe in what a true Christian is all about? Because I think they've just removed themselves so far from it that they just use this word on top of Bruce Hales, and they've got so many scales on their eyes that they can't see what they're doing. This could be such an easy fix. I've said this so many times on the podcast. It's so heart-wrenching to hear all this stuff because it's such an easy fix. It is so much easier to be kind and caring and compassionate than it is to hold this whole world of lies and corruption and deceit and making sure this is covering that and that. Let's create a new image here and then another new image here. It would be a much easier fix to just stop and really pull that mirror up in front of your face and ask yourself, what do I believe? What should be here? What is care? What is compassion? That always outweighs everything else. It's so much easier just to stop what you're doing and admit what's going on. Now, I'm not going to hold any judgment on anybody. If Bruce Hales was tomorrow, be like, you know what? This is ridiculous what we're doing. I can't hold up this facade anymore. And let's deal with this. Let's literally sit down and deal with every single person who has come forward. Let's really look at this faith and practice. The whole thing could really turn into a mainstream Christian church. It really could. But because they keep on denying, because they keep up with the front, because they keep up with the facade and the cruelty and the corruption, the lies, it's what is imploding everything. It is not us. We are not the opposers you think we are. It is your own actions that is going to crumble this cult into a million pieces, affecting every single one of our families in there. We speak out because we are trying to open your eyes to a much easier way for you to hear the truth and be able to realize that this is absolutely the complete and utter opposite of a mainstream Christian church.
I couldn't agree more.
Yep. Thank you so much, Steve, for coming back on and giving us some insight to what's happened in the last year. And many inside are listening to these. The amount of response that we are receiving from the podcast right now is, Richard and I just said the other night that we never in our wildest dreams did we realize people would listen the way that they are listening. Yeah. Yes, so many of them might be listening and having negative things to say. That doesn't matter. The thing is, that is just your indoctrination talking. Eventually, you're going to wake up and you're going to realize that everything that you have been hearing is happening in front of you, and your own soul won't be able to deny it. It won't be able to deny it. The scales will fall from your eyes and you'll really realize what is happening inside there. So thank you. We really appreciate every insider that is reaching out to us right now. We can't keep up with everybody. If you have emailed us and we have missed it, please email again or message us again. We're here for you. We are trying to do everything possible that we can in getting out what we need to get out. And we love each and every one of you. Take care. Until next time, much love to you all. How can you support Get a Life podcast? You can donate internationally via PayPal at www.paypal.me/getalifepodcast. PayPal also has a QR code that can be scanned. Or donate to our Get a Life podcast GoFundMe. If you're in a high-demand religious group and need help, please go to oliveleaf.network. To share your story or be a guest on the show, email info.getalife@proton.me. Check out www.get-a-life.net for Get a Life merchandise, books, and ways to support or get support. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to Get a Life, and comment.